Okay, so today we're going to dive into the topic of autism, but maybe from an angle you haven't heard before. We're going to go way beyond the textbook definitions to explore a perspective that, honestly, helps make sense of it all from the inside out.
We hear a lot about the traits of autism, the what, but that's really just scratching the surface. In this explainer, we're going to ask a much deeper question. What's the underlying reason, the why, that connects all of these different experiences?
And to get to that why, we have to start by looking beyond the standard diagnostic manuals. Now, don't get me wrong, they're useful for identifying traits, for sure, but they don't really explain what's happening at a deeper, more foundational level. So you have the official criteria, right, from the DSM-5. It points to these core areas: communication, social interaction, and sensory experiences. But think about it. These are just descriptions of the effects. They aren't the cause. This is really only part of the story. And it's a huge story. We're talking about more than 1% of the entire world's population being on the autism spectrum. So figuring out this why isn't just some academic thing. It's about really understanding a huge and vital part of our human family. Okay, so that brings us to a theory that offers a really powerful explanation for all this. It's called monotropism, and what it does is reframe autism, not as a list of problems, but as a unique and focused way of paying attention to the world. The theory itself was developed by some brilliant researchers, Murray, Lesser, and Lawson. And what they suggest is that for autistic people, attention is kind of like a precious resource that gets pulled in very intensely by just a few things at once. You could almost think of it as single-minded attention. And the metaphor they use for this is just perfect. A monotropic mind is like a torch beam. It's incredibly bright and tightly focused on one specific thing. Now, compare that to a polytropic mind, which is more typical for non-autistic folks. That's more like a lantern, spreading a less intense light over a much wider area. This one idea suddenly explains so much, like why switching focus can be tough for a monotropic person, but also why they can dive so incredibly deep into their passion. All right, so that's the theory. But how does this actually play out in real life? Because once you start thinking in terms of that torch beam, a lot of the lived experiences of autism suddenly start to make a whole lot more sense. Let's talk about object permanence. You know, that sense we all develop as kids that things still exist even when we can't see them. Well, if your attention is a torch beam that is completely locked onto what's right in front of you, it can be genuinely hard to keep a strong connection to things or even people that are out of sight. And I want to be really clear here. This isn't about not caring. Not at all. It's about a cognitive style where out of sight, out of mind can be a very real and often distressing experience. This is why routines and familiar objects can be so incredibly grounding. And it explains why it can be so hard to feel connected to a loved one when they aren't physically right there. It's the same kind of deal for our internal world, too. There's this thing called interoception. It's basically our sense of what's going on inside our bodies. But again, if that torch beam of attention is pointed intensely outward, totally absorbed in a passion project, that internal sensing system can kind of go offline. And the impact of that can be absolutely huge. I mean, imagine not understanding why your body is reacting a certain way, why a loud noise is causing a panic attack, or why you don't realize you're hungry until you're absolutely starving. It can be so confusing and isolating. This quote from a study participant named Betty it says it all. She said, "I just thought I was mental." And Betty's experience? Well, it's not just a story. The data backs this up completely. The constant stress of trying to navigate a world that is just not built for a monotropic mind contributes to way higher rates of anxiety and depression among autistic people. That's not a coincidence. It's a direct consequence of a mismatch between a person's neurology and their environment. But this is where the theory becomes so incredibly hopeful. Because if the problem is a mismatch, then the solution isn't to change the person, it's to change the environment. Understanding monotropism gives us a clear roadmap for how to do just that. This right here is a fundamental shift in thinking. The goal isn't assimilation, trying to make someone act neurotypical. The goal is inclusion. It's about creating spaces where a monotropic way of thinking isn't a disadvantage, but is actually understood and accommodated. So let's look at a super simple example. For a mind that's easily overwhelmed by sensory input, something like a busy, patterned carpet can be incredibly distracting and stressful. The fix is obvious, right? Create calmer, less cluttered spaces. And this idea extends to all the senses. Little changes like using soft lighting instead of harsh fluorescence, avoiding strong perfumes, cutting down on background noise, and just having a quiet room where someone can go when things get to be too much, these aren't luxuries. They are absolutely essential for creating a truly inclusive environment.
Accommodations can be social too. This system with color-coded stickers is such a fantastic tool. Maybe red means please don't engage right now, yellow is for I can do limited interaction, and green means I'm happy to chat. It just takes all the guesswork out of social interactions and it empowers everyone to engage on their own terms. And these strategies can be applied in everyday life. See how they directly address the challenges we talked about earlier? Visual schedules make change predictable. Routines provide that stability. And having a comfort object or using video calls can help bridge that gap created by challenges with object permanence. They're all just practical tools for a monotropic life.
So, what does this all add up to? Well, it's really about shifting our entire approach, moving away from just being aware of autism to actively creating meaningful inclusion. Ultimately, understanding the monotropic mind, that focused torch beam of attention, is the key that unlocks everything else. It moves us past just a list of symptoms and toward real empathy, genuine acceptance, and practical action. And the ultimate goal is to build a world like the one Katie Fowle describes here, a world where things like sounds and colors and smells are factored in, a predictable, supportive world, a place where being autistic isn't just tolerated but is truly valued and welcomed. And that brings us to the end, but it leaves us with a question. Now that you understand the torch beam, what's one small change you can make in your classroom or your workplace or your community to make it a little more welcoming for everyone? Thanks for tuning in.